name is Brett Musino. I volunteered for the draft in December of 1968. I went into the military on March 11th, 1969. Spent 2 years in, got out for 2 years, and worked 3 part-time jobs because there was no work available until I finally said, that's it. I went back in the military for 3 more years. Stationed in Fort Belvoir, MacDill Air Force Base. Got out, joined the reserves, and just been living day to day since then.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have 4 brothers and 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Wow, big family.
Actually, no, I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters. 2 years ago, my daughter gave me an ancestry
DNA test?
23, and yeah, one of the DNA things, and it came back that I had a half sister.
Wow.
Which I didn't know about. Conversed with her back and forth, and she is my dad's daughter. My dad has died in 2001. My mom, she came up and we met her March 3rd, 2020.
Oh, wow.
And she was going to come back that summer, but pandemic shut everything down.
That was literally like 2 weeks before everything shut down.
Really?
Wow. Yeah.
So my mom met her and fell in love with her. And I wish I'd brought pictures of her because she is my full sister, Charmaine, and her are twins.
Really?
Oh, it's amazing. I will send you a picture of the 2 of them.
Yeah.
My wife and I went down to Georgia where she lives and met her. So I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Actually, I was born and raised in Woolgate, July 1950. I was born at Waterbury, but my folks lived in Woolgate. Kindergarten through high school was Woolgate. I graduated in 1968. In 68, you either went in the military or you went on to college. I went to a community college in Winstead. Didn't last long. And I went down and I volunteered for the draft. And in March 11th, 1969, I raised my hand in New Haven. And when I finished basic training, I was assigned to get advanced individual training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri as a combat engineer. I really didn't do too much except blow stuff up, look for explosives, and build bridges. So that's what I did for the next 2 months. This basic was 8 weeks, advanced individual training was another 8 weeks. So in the end of June, orders came down for everybody that graduated. And of course mine came down for Vietnam. And that's when it got really interesting. Got on the plane, flew to Alaska. From Alaska, we flew to Hawaii. From Hawaii to Japan, and Japan to Ben Hoa, South Vietnam. He stopped all flights going in. Anybody that landed, he turned around. So I spent a week in Vietnam. So for three days we knew nothing. Then it started to filter in that, hey, we're going back home. So they flew us back, same thing. Another 20 hours on a flight back to California. Thousands upon thousands that were on orders for Vietnam. those that they shipped back, those that were halfway there, so the place was becoming it was a nut house. Finally, they just started shipping us out, and they shipped me to Fort Hood, Texas. Why, I have no clue. I was a combat engineer. There's no engineer, nothing, but they were just getting him out of California. Needless to say, my family and my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife after 52 years, we're still married, were a little surprised. Because my dad is ex-Marines, and I couldn't convince him, what had happened. But then he read the news, and so he kind of believed it.
Did he think you got kicked out?
He had no clue. He thought at first I went AWOL, and it was going to be I was a deserter because I was supposed to go to a war zone. And finally, after reading the news and seeing my written orders, he believed me. I asked my wife at the time, I had just turned 19. I said, listen, why don't you come back with me? Let's get married. Come back to Fort Hood with me. Which she did. But not until she was pregnant. January 2nd of 1970, we got married at Fort Hood, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Until May. And my wife at the time was about 6 months pregnant, and I came down on orders for Vietnam again. A week after I came down on orders for Vietnam, my wife delivered my son.
Oh, wow.
May 29th. She was 6 weeks early. We flew back to Connecticut. I took another 30-day leave. Now I'm 90 days in, and I've only earned about 30 days. My wife and my son moved in with her parents, who lived here in Woket. They had no engineers, no combat engineers. They had lost their demolitions guy, and they had no one training anyone new that was coming in. So I became the trainer. I was not supposed to go out on assignments with them, but I did. And I was there until the beginning of 71.
So how old was he at this point?
Well, now he's almost a year. He's a little under a year old. So I was working 3 different part-time jobs. I was working for a carpenter until noon, and I was taking some college business courses. Why, I don't know, but I just decided to try college again. But I had 2 classes in the afternoon, and then I worked selling sporting goods for, remember G Fox?
I don't think
Yeah, it was like a Macy's.
Oh, okay.
They were in the old mall in Waterbury.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in the sporting goods until they closed at 10 o'clock. And then at 11:30, I went to the theater. They had a theater in the mall.
Mm-hmm.
And I cleaned the theater after the last show got out. And I did that till 2:30 or 3 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
And then at 6 o'clock, I was up again. And this went on for about a year and a half, and I just said to and I had, what drove me nuts is I had an application in for state police, and I had gone through the physical, I'd gone through the physical, everything, and I was the top of the list because I was a veteran. And in the beginning of 1973, I got a letter from the state police saying that they were going to put a moratorium on hiring and sending anybody to class for a new class of state police. And I just had a long talk with my wife, and I said, you know, we can't do this. We're barely paying bills. I'm going to go back in the military. You know, if I go back in, I've already talked with them. I can hold my rank, and so she agreed. She said, "All right, well, do what you have to do." So in May of 1973, I went back in, and on a 3-year assignment because I had volunteered this time. But I got to pick what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and the assignment that I wanted. So a friend of mine had gone into heating and air conditioning, and I seemed to think I could be pretty good at it. So I went to the engineer school at Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Okay.
It was a 36-week course, and graduated number 1 in the class. I was a specialist at the time in E4, and most of the guys that were going through were privates. So, and then believe me, in the military back in the early 70s, you didn't have to put much effort into becoming an excellent student. So what happened was they decided that since I had some rank and I graduated at the top of my class, they kept me on as a drill instructor. So I stayed as a drill instructor and teaching what I had just graduated in. And I stayed there for 2 years. And after 2 years, I came down on assignment for, actually I came down on assignment for Korea. And I went, oh man, I'm gonna freeze, I don't wanna go to Korea. But being so close to DC, I drove into the Pentagon. And I said, look, you know, I've got 2 young kids. You know, one's 2, the other one's a newborn. I said, is there anything else you can do? And he said, well, you have to move. You've been there 2 years, and it was just a 1-year assignment. So I said, we can send you to Germany. I said, Germany? That's a 3-year assignment. I've only got a year left. Well, you got to move. He said, hang on a second. He started flipping through paperwork. He said, I'll tell you what, there is one more place that's looking for a heating and air conditioning guy. It's MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. I said, an Air Force base? He said, yeah, there's 8 Army personnel stationed there. You'd run the heating and air conditioning department, but there's one thing about it. Every 30 days, you're gone for 30 days. It's a 30-day TDY, 30 days at MacDill Air Force Base, 30 days gone. And it was an organization called Joint Communications Support Element. It's still there. They've run everything from Afghanistan to Iraq. I mean, but in the 70s, they just sent us places to test equipment. And it was my job and the 3 guys that worked for me to maintain whatever heating and air conditioning and radio supply equipment. So I did that for the next year. And after my 3 years was up, I wanted to stay. By now I had almost 6 years in, because the 2 years I was out, from 71 to 73, I spent in the reserves. So that counted towards pay. So I had almost 7 years in. I said to my wife, I said, look, in 13 years I can retire. She was absolutely tired of moving from place to place, of me being gone. She's pregnant again.
Oh wow.
And she said, I'll tell you what. She said, I'm going home to Connecticut. If you want to stay, that's fine. You can come and see us whenever you're back stateside, but I've got to get home. She said, I miss Connecticut, I miss Woken, I miss my family. So I kind of tucked my tail between my legs and I got out. I followed her home. And we had our third little one back in Connecticut. I stayed in the reserves for 4 more years, so I basically was in the military from 69 to 78.
Oh wow.
And when 78 came around, it was kind of silly on my part. I should have stayed because I still could have retired. But it was a different, people didn't look at military the way they do now. It was completely different. I don't think I talked about Vietnam for 40 years.
Wow.
I didn't talk to my kids about it. My wife, I mean, and it goes back to when I came back from Vietnam in the beginning of 71. There were people spitting at you in uniform.
Really?
It was, you're a baby. Everybody's a baby killer. So I just kind of pushed it to the back of my head. Like most Vietnam vets, never talked about it. And it wasn't, and I think it was because of the Vietnam vets, it's the way we treat veterans now. Because they're doing a job, they're doing what the government has asked them to do. But the way we were treated in the 60s and the early 70s should never and will never happen again. And that's due to people like Stacy. It was a difficult time. The 60s were a difficult time.
Why do you think that though? Like why
What?
weren't
Well,
you
it was
guys really
because of the
accepted?
war. Vietnam was not a popular war, and there were so many against it that they treated the vets as if, we were all, oh, let's go kill Vietnamese. And none of us wanted to be there, just as,
It's not your fault.
yeah, but, we were doing what the government asked us to do.
You're doing a job, yeah.
That was as simple as it was. So it wasn't till probably the early 2000s that I finally sat my boys down and talked with them about my time in Vietnam, what went on.
How old were they at that point?
70, 30. My oldest was in his 30s.
Oh,
My youngest was probably 29, 31. My daughter was 27.
Mhm.
Maybe older. 70, 30. They knew enough not to ask about it. Because I can think back to how I was back then. I wasn't in a good spot. Like most vets, I was a heavy drinker. I turned to things,
right.
and my kids just, thankfully, they dealt with me.
Accordingly.
My wife, I don't know, I look at her sometimes now and I just say, thank you for putting up with me, because I was not a very nice individual for a long time.
Do you think your time in the service was more of a physical battle or a psychological battle?
It was in my head.
Mm.
Most of it was in my head. And that's the way it is for a lot of the Vietnam vets. You fight that continuous battle in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of us turned it around. And, in the 80s, we got the wall built. In the 90s, with what was going on overseas, many of us just decided we're not going to have vets coming back from this war treated like we were. So I think the Korean War vets and the Vietnam vets, and that's what was sad is they would not even let me join the VFW.
Really?
That's how strange it was. The World War II and the Korean War vets, they I don't know what they saw in Vietnam, but they didn't even consider that we were like them, doing something that we really didn't want to do, but were asked to, and so we did. But then things started to turn around, late 80s, early 90s, and I think the vets had a lot to do with how they're treated now. People realize that you're doing stuff for the country, and that's basically what it comes down to. So that's when I finally opened up to my kids about what I had gone through. I apologize for what I put them through because I was not a good dad in the first 20 years of any of their lives. But hopefully I've turned it around. I got 7 wonderful grandchildren.
7, wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the oldest is going to be graduating college next year, and the youngest is in 3rd grade.